Speaker.
Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is a pleasure to be back in the House for 2015, and I have to say it's never been more enjoyable to be a member of the Labour caucus. Like my colleagues, I went away and had a fantastic summer. I enjoyed a lot of time with my family. I enjoyed a few barbecues, and I can tell you what, sir, at those barbecues I heard one refrain over and over again. Oh, I like that, Mr. Little. We like that, Mr. Little. That's what I was hearing all summer long from people around my electorate and around the country, because New Zealanders really like Andrew Little. They see him as a straight shooter, a straight talker, and they compare him to John Key, that slippery Mr. Key, the man who you just have to look at him and you know when he's not being completely honest. You know from his body language, when he starts to shift a little bit from side to side, the old, we all know about that. New Zealanders instinctively know that John Key is getting shiftier and shiftier, and they now have a leader of the opposition who is an absolute straight talker and is taking it to John Key. And I tell you what, it feels fantastic in the Labour caucus, sir. I've gone away, I'm a little bit thinner, I'm a little bit hairier, but I'm ready to come back and take the fight to the national government. And I listened closely to what the Prime Minister had to say in his statement. I listened very closely, and I wanted particularly to hear what he had to say about employment relations, and it wasn't much. And sir, I was listening very closely to hear if this government was prepared to take action on one of the most insidious issues in employment relations right now, not just here in New Zealand, but in other countries like us, and that is the issue of zero-hour contracts. Zero-hour contracts are something that we have seen proliferate in the wake of the financial crisis and in the wake of the unmitigated attack on workers' rights that we have seen year after year from this national government. There are now thousands of New Zealanders who are stuck on these zero-hour contracts. What is a zero-hour contract? It is a contract where the worker has to make themselves available for work at all times, but there is no requirement on the employer whatsoever to provide that worker with work. They are therefore very different to casual contracts. Casual contracts can provide flexibility both for the employer and the employee, but it's an absolutely one-sided relationship with these zero-hour contracts, and we see more and more of them every day, particularly in the fast food industry, but also increasingly in supermarkets and in the retail industry, and we know that we're just going to see more and more of them if the government doesn't take action. So that's what I was listening for in the Prime Minister's speech. What was he going to do about zero-hour contracts? And the answer was, sir, nothing. Not a mention of it. Not one. So, sir, today I lodged my Certainty at Work bill, which takes aim at zero-hour contracts and seeks to rule them out from our employment relations framework. So that what will have to happen is employers will have to give an indication of how many hours a worker can expect to get if they have to be available for work at all times. It still allows flexibility. Of course, we have to strike a balance between flexibility and certainty at work. But it gives workers an idea of how much work they can expect to get from one week to the next, so that they can plan, so that they can put food on the table for their children every single week, so that they can go to the bank and talk about getting a loan or a mortgage, so that they can do things that we used to take for granted. We used to believe that if you got a job, you'd be able to make ends meet, to provide for your family and get ahead. But these zero-hour contracts make life utterly insecure for ordinary working people, and we are seeing them used more and more every day, and this government has completely ignored that issue. So, sir, on this side of the House, we are prepared to take action. We are prepared to do what is required to ensure that our Employment Relations Act ceases the use of these zero-hour contracts and gives workers certainty whilst also ensuring that employers have flexibility. Sir, Brett Patterson works for Burger King in Hamilton, and he's one of thousands of employees who are in the fast food industry on zero-hour contracts, and he says it's incredibly hard to make a living. He says, I always find myself having to fight to get the hours that I need. And he says it's even worse when you're sick, because if you're sick, you can't be there to fight for the hours that you need to make ends meet. How many hours a worker gets on a zero-hour contract can be everything from 0 to 20 to 40 to 5 to 60. And it depends often on how good a relationship you have with the person who does the rosters. And if you have a falling out with the person who does the rosters, you can quickly find yourself getting fewer and fewer hours, maybe even not being asked to come to work at all. That's the reality for ordinary working people. So, sir, I looked for a response from John Key. I looked to see what the Prime Minister thought about this issue which affects so many ordinary New Zealanders, and I found one. I was surprised, but I found one. The Prime Minister's answer to workers on zero-hour contracts: get advice. Go and get some legal advice before you sign up to one of these things. Well, that sounds all fine and dandy, but it just shows you how utterly out of touch with reality John Key is. Because if a worker turns down a zero-hour contract at Burger King or Wendy's or McDonald's or Glassons or Hallenstein's, then there'll be 10, 20, 30 other people lining up to take that job instead of them. That's the reality. That's the reality, sir. And Brett Hudson says, what's new about it? What's new about it is that unemployment has gone up under this national government, so far more people are competing for jobs than ever had to compete for jobs before. So every time a worker goes along and is offered a zero-hour contract, if they take advice or if they try to bargain with the employer, then it's down the road, my friend. There's the door. We'll take one of the 50 other people who applied for that job. So, sir, John Key is absolutely out of touch on this issue. And he's broken so many promises to workers. Sir, I remember when National came to office, their big goal for workers was to close the wage gap with Australia. Sir, when National came to office, the wage gap, the average wage gap with Australia was $121.76 a week. Today, it is $170.28 a week. National has demonstrably failed on one of the key tasks they set themselves, and they have broken a promise to ordinary workers. And I hear the National members talking about how average wages are going up in New Zealand. Well, whoop-de-doo, because we know how the average wage is going up in New Zealand. It's the rich getting richer, the people on high incomes, on high wages, seeing their wages going up, and everybody else being left behind. That's how average wages go up in this country. Take a look at median incomes. If you're serious about getting things sorted for ordinary working people, take a look at median incomes and you will see that in real terms they have fallen year on year under this national government. Average wages are rising, Mr. Hudson. I know you can't get your head around this. I know it's a bit of a complicated thing that you have to understand, but average wages may be rising. That's a result of people on high wages getting richer National Party's mates getting richer and everybody else being left behind. Sir, on this side of the House, we know that it takes more than productivity gains. It takes more than a strong economy. Those things are important. But we need to make sure that we have our legislation right, that we have our regulations right, and that we enforce minimum standards so that workers can get a fair share of a growing economy. And right now, sir, workers are not getting a fair share, and that's National's legacy.
The Honourable Louise Upston.